volunteers. They bought their own musket, their uniform, their bicorns. The cavalrymen you see down there brought their own horses. The artillerymen, I think there's a gun crew down there, have brought their own cannons. American field artillery firing back. Then you can see some American guys coming up there. The light infantry unit behind is actually their dismounted dragoons, guys off their horses using firearms. So again, watch the British again fire a volley. So you'll notice both armies, both the British Army and the American Army, are carrying flags. In both cases, these are regimental flags. In the American example, the red flag you see down there at the far end is the 1st Virginia Regiment. And in the British example, it's the 43rd Regiment of Foot. And they're used in combat where you dress off the colors. So the men are lined up evenly with the flag so that they keep that, again, shotgun-like effect. It's the tactics are dictated by the weaponry. Flags were carried in battle throughout this period. In fact, they would be carried as late as the 1880s. But by then, thanks to rifling, people started to think, hey, this is nuts. Let's wear camouflage, let's hide. And it became more like modern warfare. But therefore, in some museums, you'll see flags with bullet holes in them. For example, as late as this American Civil War. Now, you may be able to see near to the British artillery. You'll see a unit standing here wearing very tall hats and bright yellow pants and waistcoats. It's one of those German units I was pointing out earlier. To the left of the Germans are the British Foot Guards. These are the guys who to this day guard Buckingham Palace. So some of the units you see today here on the parade square still exist in the modern British and Canadian armies. If you're close up, you can hear that the Germans are giving their commands, auf Deutsch. Now, I can't see from where I am, but I don't think I see any French troops on the American side. France supported the rebellion. Early on, they sent money, firearms, and ammunition to the rebels to help George Washington and the guys fight against the British. Not so much that they were pro-democracy. Louis XVI certainly was not a Democrat by any stretch of the imagination. He was an absolute monarch. But it's the old story of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So therefore, shoot British people, yep, they're willing to supply you with the ammunition. So almost all the British are armed with Brown Bess muskets. Many of the Americans are armed with Charleville muskets, French muskets. Eventually, the French came into the war, as did the Spanish. The war spiraled out of control from a British point of view. The French sent an army here to America. They sent a fleet here to America. So, for example, at the Battle of Yorktown, there were about 5,000 American troops and about 5,000 French troops fighting about 4,000 British. And the British had planned to escape by ship, but the French fleet showed up and entrapped them there at Yorktown. The last big battle of the Revolution. The French and the Spanish attacked British possessions, for example, in Gibraltar. They fought throughout the Caribbean, their fleets and armies, and twice the French seized control of the English Channel and almost invaded England. So the British realized by the late 1780s things were going really badly. They had no allies to speak of. and therefore they had to end the war, cut their losses. So the war ended 2 years later, after 2 years of negotiation, with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Now, unfortunately for the French got nothing out of it. They'd hoped to regain Canada, but the rebels signed a separate peace on them, stabbed them in the back, and so unfortunately for the French, they ended up with a massive debt and gained nothing. The French government then spiraled out of control downwards, went broke, and 6 years later the French Revolution broke out, and as I'm sure you all know, Louis XVI was sent to the guillotine, was beheaded. So on the British side, you see the Germans in blue, the Hessians in blue, the British in red generally. On the American side, you'll see it's a mixture of uniforms. Generally, the Americans struggled with supplies, so some of them will be in rifle shirts. A lot of them will have blue coats. And the facings on the uniforms, that's the collars and the cuffs, will designate which unit they belong to. Yep. Now, I don't see any on the British side this afternoon. On the American side, I think maybe I see, it looks like a guy holding a spear. I think maybe closest to the crowd I can see that. These are pole arms. These great big spears you'll see some officers carrying. It helps them to direct the men where the men should line up, and then it's easy for the men to see the officers because of the big long spear he's carrying. But it's purely ceremonial. You probably would never use it in combat. Here's an example. The German NCO is carrying a pole arm. For many years, I carried one as a sergeant major, and the men always said it was a lightning rod. Range, as I said, you'd be unlucky to be hit at this range. See, the horsemen saw the men all fired, so they know there's a moment they can charge home before the men can reload. I was told by one of the cavalrymen that his horse really enjoys reenacting. He loves to run in and scare the infantry and stamp his feet at them and everything. You'll see on both sides as well, behind the infantry, you'll see some women. In the British Army especially, and in the Rebel Army, women were officially part of the armed forces. In the British Army, every fifth man could bring his wife. Now, wife is maybe a bit of a loose term. You would ask the girl, will you marry me? If she said yes, that's it, you're married. And then she received half rations compared to what he received. Same with any children that resulted from this marriage. You have to remember in the 18th century they didn't have birth control, so therefore they had lots of kids. If the husband was killed in the British Army, the wife had 72 hours to find a new husband or she was thrown out. Because you don't want loose women in the camp causing trouble. So instead, she had to immediately find some other guy, and he would marry her. He would say, would you marry me? Sure, fine. Okay, we're married. I read one account where the sergeant, the woman's husband, died. They'd gone out to the cemetery, buried him, and the unit marched back. The sergeant stepped forward and said, Mrs. Jones, or whatever her name was, will you marry me? She burst into tears, upset. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry, thinking he had asked her too soon on the day of her husband's funeral. And she said, no, that's not it. It's that when I was out at the cemetery, the corporal in charge of the burial party had already asked me to marry you. So she'd married the man of lesser rank, the corporal, rather than the sergeant. already before she even got back from her husband's funeral. The women played an important role in the army, doing a lot of work like laundry work and so on, but not cooking. Cooking was generally done by the men. The food was issued to them raw, and they had to bake their own bread, cook their own meat, and so on. And in both cases, in both sides, it was very difficult, the logistics, to keep the men fed and clothed. In the British case, because a lot of the material had to come from Britain, and in the American case, they just didn't have the money. And so therefore, I think probably everyone's aware of the suffering the Army did in, for example, Valley Forge, where they went short on material. So you can see on the British side the flag flying very clearly now. The white flag with the big red T on it. As I said, it's the 43rd Regiment of Foot, and if you look at the uniforms of the men around it, they're red coats with white facings, white collars, cuffs, and lapels, so therefore the color is white. If they were, let's say, the 34th, it'd be a yellow-faced regiment, so the color would be yellow. Now you notice on both sides, the men are firing in two ranks. They have that shotgun-like effect. So what happens is the guys in the back tend to aim high, because you're aiming over the shoulders of the men ahead of you. So the officers on horseback are often hit. As I said, everyone here is a volunteer, all dedicated to the hobby of preserving history, bringing it to life. You'll see sometimes we'll be put on large displays like this at public events. Other times it's small lectures, like in schoolrooms and so on. So you can see how the left flank of the British Army is curved back in response to the aggression of the American cavalry. This is very much a family hobby. So many of the men will bring their wives and girlfriends to the weekends with them. Obviously you don't bring them on the same weekend. Of course, in the 18th century, there was a big deal at the end of the day, who held the field, who controlled the battlefield at the end. So you wanted to drive the other guys off and hold the field, because then you could take all the stuff. So it's before the Industrial Revolution. They really haven't invented the factory yet. So everything's made by hand. The boots, the hats, the cannons, the muskets. So somebody made that lock mechanism in that musket. Somebody made the steel barrel in the musket. Somebody carved the wood of the stock of the musket. So you purchase a musket, you buy the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. So if you can gather all that material at the end of the battle, that's a huge advantage to you. Collect up all those cast-off muskets, and from the dead guys, you recycle the uniforms. Recycling is a big thing for them. It's not a modern idea at all. And they would recycle the boots to guys and so on. And then they would take the dead and they tended to bury them naked. Now we're not going to display that, madam. Thank you very much. But if you think about it, if you visit a Revolutionary War battlefield, you never see cemeteries. It happened long enough ago and they buried them randomly enough. There aren't the military cemeteries you will see in the Civil War or, of course, World War I and World War II. At Omaha Beach, for example. So you can see some of the German Jaegers firing at the American cavalry as they ride up. And one British Dragoon is trying to hold off the whole American army. They didn't have medals at this period. Medals are a more modern idea.
Okay.
So those people who were very brave, they either promoted them or gave them money. They gave medals like a Victoria Cross or a Congressional Medal of Honor, all post-date this period. Just like rank stripes, like corporal stripes and sergeant stripes, that hasn't been invented yet either. You'll see the sergeants are wearing sashes to show their rank. The officers, like the men you see